Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Women Automotive Network First Leadership Interview of 2023. My name is Maya Rooz. I'm a certified coach, a speaker, and a fellow automotive professional, and I'm a member of Women Automotive Network. Here at Women Automotive Network, we provide a platform for diversity, inclusion, and technology conversations, and we are really excited about the 2023 events that we're preparing for you all. Today, actually, for the first time ever, we're live here on LinkedIn, and I'm joining you from a very snowy Munich in Germany. I hope you're all comfortable, you have your tea or coffee ready, and I hope we can begin. So today I have the honor to chat to one of our wonderful members. She is a best-selling author, an award-winning speaker, a lecturer, a CEO, and an absolute role model in workplace diversity and inclusion. And it's none other than Furkan Karayel. Furkan, so lovely to see you. How are you? Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Maya, for this warm introduction and for inviting me to speak at the first event of your leadership series. I'm super excited, and I'm connecting from Dublin, Ireland this morning. It's cloudy weather and not too bad. It's around the same normal season temperature, so I'm super excited to be speaking at you today on our conversation.
Oh, we are as well. We're very happy to have you. And actually, you and I will be talking about how to unapologetically champion diversity and inclusion in the workplace. And it's all based on your amazing book, Inclusive Intelligence. But before we actually dive in, I would really like to ask you to tell our viewers, what is your story?
Thank you. I think if I start from my story, it all makes sense to show why do I do what I do. My background is actually in software engineering. I worked in tech sector for about 10 years as a software engineer. And 5 years ago, I started my company, Diverse In. And the reason for this was, first of all, not able to see women who look like me from different ethnic backgrounds in the leadership positions of big tech companies. It was really a frustration. While you work so much and you put so much work into the sector that you do, but you never see role models there. The second biggest reason was diversity, inclusion, belonging. These words were being used a lot as a marketing tool by many organizations globally, but the action piece was missing. And as a result, I founded my company, Diverse In, with the vision to make it the go-to place for diverse and inclusion trainings, education, resources, and all action-oriented diverse and inclusion in the workplace. So since then, we provide so many different programs, workshops, and action-oriented diverse and inclusion to companies, including Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, Microsoft, Pfizer, VHI, NHS, you name it. And we are actually delighted to bring different elements of diverse and inclusion. Not only looking at it from one perspective, sometimes the gender is the priority for one organizations, and sometimes, race and ethnicity, but we look at diverse and inclusion in a holistic way. And in the last 2 years, I have been lecturing at IEDT Dunleary. It's a university here in Dublin on their Equality, Diverse and Inclusion Master's program. And last year, I published my book, as you said, Inclusive Intelligence, How to be a Role Model for Diversity and Inclusion in the Workplace. And last year, in 2022, I started my book tour. I traveled around Europe so far in 8 countries and over 20 cities, and I introduced the book, what it is, and what leaders can actually learn from inclusive leaders and their action points, what they can bring to their organizations in terms of diversity and inclusion. So that's me in a nutshell.
Wow, that sounds absolutely amazing. Thank you for sharing that with all of us. And I'm wondering, what inspired you to write your book?
So during my time, since I started my business on diversity and inclusion, we get an opportunity to meet with so many global leaders. And these leaders were from different locations. They have different backgrounds and they do different roles. And what we have seen that some leaders were naturally so good at inclusion. And it really didn't matter all of these differences, but they were so keen to make the to live diverse and inclusion. And in those leaders, we have found 6 skills in common. And they were self-awareness, empathy, engagement, cultural wisdom, accountability, and commitment. So while we learned so much about how leaders, based on their authentic selves, there's no one particular action or steps that it's implemented throughout everyone in the same way. No, they were implemented in a very different way. So we wanted to really capture this in a book so that in each chapter of the book we talk about how they implement those skills on their day-to-day job and how do they basically live it. So I have given the examples that we learned from leaders, and I also injected my own story working in tech, sometimes the only women in the tech, sometimes the only non-native English speaker in the team, and in so many ways, what was my experience time to time, what I have seen that could be improved in terms of diversity and inclusion, and what was the small actions maybe organizations or leaders could take. So I injected them all, and I have written the book. It took me 1.5 years, interesting enough, to find a publisher. That was very difficult, but eventually it came together, and we launched it in a Museum of Literature here in Dublin in a lovely event in 2021.
Wow, wonderful. And thanks to people like yourself and people like you, these conversations about diversity and inclusion are gaining momentum. But still, I don't know about you, but I would argue that the expectation is still that these changes that we want to see in the workplace, the expectation is that they need to start somewhere else, in another department within HR or somewhere higher in the organization. And I feel that this is still an issue. And as I was reading your book, I actually thought of the Gandhi quote, which said, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." And it absolutely stood out in your book for me. And you give this sense of empowerment to your readers, that when we start with ourselves, we can then take responsibility, and it gives us a sense of control. So it's this self part that really stood out. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, because when we are talking about diversity and inclusion, many people either say it's, look, we have a HR team or diversity and inclusion team, they are handling it. So this sometimes the first response that it's not my job. I don't have accountability. I have nothing to share in this space. And on the other side, some employees, maybe they could be junior on their roles, maybe they are just, they just got into the position in that organization. They don't know much about the organization's culture, but they want to make a difference. And then they see that their leaders are not really invested in. And they have this like, I can't do anything. I'm not a leader. This is not my job type of mindset. So I wanted to clarify in my book, as you said, that it's actually everyone's job. In one of the examples I would like to give, Maya, that I was in an interview with a leader, and he was absolutely brilliant. I learned so much from him, and he was saying that he's to feel his to get a new member for his team. The HR was always shortlisting the same profile people and giving the team leader to him to choose, to interview him. And then he find that out and he said, I'm gonna, talk to HR. Why do you always profile the same people? But I actually would like to see the diversity in the shortlist. Like, how are you actually reaching out to people? How do you get these CVs, being shortlisted? So what are your criteria really? So he was going back to see how these things, the systematic biases were injected. So he was trying to solve that from the root cause while rather than sitting down and saying, you know what, I had only 5 CVs out of this is the one that I have chosen. So having that mindset that I can make a change, it could be in a form of going back to who is shortlisting your candidates, or it could be organizing an event about inclusive leadership or about diversity and inclusion, about the events that's making a real difference, inviting people. For example, the events that we are hosting today as part of Women Automotive Network, it opens definitely a different light on our mind to see what are the things we can learn that we haven't known before. Is there something I can implement, or do we have a systematic bias in our system, and how can we revert back to this rather than accepting and saying that it's not my job?
Wow, that's brilliant. Thank you for sharing. I have heard actually also about the recruiting and the experience that hiring managers were just getting pre-screened candidates and it was not diverse at all. That's very interesting. But what I'm curious about is, you are a role model in diversity and inclusion, and we are all learning from you. But what I want to know is, how do role models like you act? Like, how do you show up day in and day out?
First of all, what a role model in my own terms, like what makes them role models? For example, if we follow up a soccer team, that people around us, people from within our network, within our friendship, they know about which team that we are supporting. It is very unlikely that people don't know about the team that we are supporting. It's I find it's a bit like that as well. If we have that passion in us to be a role model, people around us must be aware of that as well. They must see what is your story. For example, I shared my story, your story just before our talk. You shared that, Maya, as well, that your story is authentic to you, my story is authentic to you. So we always find that resonance to why diversity and inclusion actually matters to us. This story has so much power in it, and I think we should own it. We should recognize it, and we should own it. And then people around us must know about it as well. So that's connection to why does it matter to me and it matters to others, and why sharing is powerful, makes, I think, people role models. That's what I believe. The power of my story, it's not because the power of the story, it's because I had the courage at some stage on my life to share it openly. And then I have seen that it's actually, opening different lights on people's mind, and, finding that resonance. That's what I believe is, making people aware that, you're dedicated for this. Why does it matter to you? It's very, obvious.
Brilliant. Thank you. So owning and sharing your story is what I'm taking away from this.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. And there is a thing you say in your book, and you say behaviors are contagious and they make our culture. So which are those behaviors that in your mind have the most positive impact on culture?
One of the significant one is the sharing culture. For example, once we know about something, once we share it, then it's more likely to be added later on by another person. So that's very important for building that, sharing what we know, the insights, the knowledge within the organization that makes our culture more impactful. Why? Because most of the time the cultures are built by the first employees, sometimes the CEO, the first executives. Way of working is being adapted because they were the first, that's what they required from other people. But actually, this is not particularly the only way to do business. And with diverse and inclusion, we find out so many about different ways of working. I tell you a story. I came to Ireland as an Erasmus student, well, I think 18 years ago. And that's how I actually ended up here in Dublin. And so I had so many international students from Spain, France, from different parts of the world. They came, and the way that we used to study was different. But we were collaborating. Sometimes we were, adapting the way of there. Sometimes I used to join a different groups, study groups. So I learned so much out of this experience. So it's like that. The more we open to share our way of doing things, then we are going to learn so much. Sometimes we are going to leave. Sometimes we are going to adapt with different ways. But it's to be able to allow that space so that we can learn from each other naturally.
Brilliant. Thank you. Sharing culture, again, is something I'm taking away from your answers.
Yeah.
Wonderful. You mentioned so many prominent businesses that you work with and where you train leaders and practice inclusive intelligence on a daily basis. And what are some, or maybe even just one, best practice example of diversity and inclusion that you have seen to date? And ideally, maybe something that would be particularly interesting for women in automotive industry.
Mm-hmm. The most impactful one I have seen, the vulnerability in leadership. Once the leadership is open to learn from their own mistakes and accepting their own mistake, having that vulnerability and courage to embrace it, that makes a huge difference. And I have seen that, for example, the one that I mentioned earlier about how one manager was digging out what was the problem in terms of the screening of the short-listed candidates is an example. And then one particular company that I work with, and you would always see them, they are role models in diversity, they are doing the best, but they actually had the courage and vulnerability to say that, what, our media is very good on diversity and inclusion, we are absolutely doing our best, but we believe we need more support on our leaders buying in the idea of diversity and inclusion can bring so much in terms of revenue, in terms of employee engagement to their teams, because there are still some leaders that we have, they don't buy in. So what can we do about this? So being that openness and going extra length rather than only seeing it as a marketing practice.
Yeah, I mean, vulnerability is it's something that I also learned through my coaching education. Vulnerability creates trust, obviously, and when there is trust, there is everything else that follows. So it's very interesting. What ways would you say that you're training the leaders to practice this vulnerability? I think that's crucial, and it's so hard sometimes when you're on top to be vulnerable with your teams. So what's your view on this?
Yeah. In my book, the first chapter, as I mentioned, is self-awareness. So there's a practice at the end of the book. It's basically a 360, like emotionally intelligence. So you give yourself some, rate. How do you think you're doing in terms of self-awareness, empathy, engagement, cultural wisdom, accountability, and commitment. And then you ask the same question to your team. How do they think that you're doing, but anonymously, and you get an average result from your team, and you see the difference, and then you say, okay, actually there are things that I didn't know about myself, but my team is actually telling me with this exercise. So the self-awareness practice for inclusive intelligence pillars on how your team thinks that you're doing and how do you think that you're doing. We all have our own, blind spots. We are human beings. There will be things that we will be missing out, but that's okay as long as we are open to learning. We are open to digging out what can we do better, and how can we learn, this from others. Genuinely, openly. It's not a personal attack. It's on to make my professional growth better. Basically, if I don't do that, that's still okay. But if I do that, that shows that I have an intention to improve and dig out on my blind spots so that I am more aware of how I am being, perceived outside of my, my inner thoughts.
Yeah. So what you're saying is ask for feedback, listen to the feedback, and reflect on it, and then you can change, because all change has to come from self-awareness. Absolutely.
And practices like this. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Well, you mentioned another chapter in your book, and this is what I want to inquire about next. You talk a lot about cultural wisdom, and you actually gave a very interesting example of how at one point in your career, you were in the office with your colleagues, and it was during Ramadan, and your colleagues very kindly kept inviting you to go with them for ice cream because there was a company-wide initiative. And you had to explain repeatedly that you could not eat during daytime. And as I was reading the book and thinking, well, this week, many cultures are celebrating the Lunar New Year. And what I'm wondering is, what could we all do this week in our offices, in our workplaces, to embrace this cultural wisdom that you talk about and ensure that our colleagues who are celebrating actually feel very seen and heard?
I'm going to give a very simple answer to that. Let's join today's celebration. How do they celebrate it? I know it's, it was the night before, but next time we can join their celebration. I learned so much about the lunar calendar and about the celebration, everything. Again, while I was an Erasmus student back in Oslo and IT, I was surrounded by so many Chinese friends. And each year we used to have a celebration in the canteen in the evening. And so it's all about spending time in that atmosphere. And if you have a friend who celebrates it, go and join them. If you don't know, then there must be somebody within your network who joins them as well. So let's celebrate it together, because I think what is, it's so beautiful to make that celebration stronger, and that shows that we recognize, we appreciate, we are there as an ally, and we would like to learn more, we would like to support, we'd like to feel that empathy, put ourselves into the shoes of people who celebrate it. So it's as simple as sometimes, joining the celebration.
Yeah. And you mentioned your university experience. I grew up in a very international community as well. I went to high school, international high school, university. I lived in 5 different countries, and my children are now at international schools. And I wondered, when does that stop? Why do we not inquire about other cultures? Why do we not have these international days at work as well? Because I think it's quite cool when my kids say, oh, we have an international day and everybody's bringing food from other places in the world. So I think that's definitely something we should do in the workplace as well, to learn about each other's cultures. 100%.
Absolutely. And how growing up in a diverse environment, what do you think, Maya, that's what did you gain out of this experience, if you would like to share, because that is so beautiful, that's very unique.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, I think a perspective and openness to the world. I come, even my family, we're multicultural, multinational. I am a Serbian. I was born in Serbia. My husband is from Hungary. Our children were born in Britain, and I'm a triple citizen. So I live and breathe diversity every single day in my own family. And I think the best thing really is that my world, I believe, is completely open. My best friends are from all over the world. And it's that, the Chinese New Year, celebrating everything, knowing what, when they see things, that it comes from a different perspective. And I would definitely say this openness to the world, that we're all different, and yet in a very strange way, we're actually all the same. So I think when you don't see borders anymore, we just all become the same. I even struggle telling people where I'm from, because I always have to explain, I was born here, but I lived here, and da-da-da. So we're all the same.
Yeah. And it also, what I believe, it also aided me to be more understanding and more thoughtful when I'm, thinking in different in different situations. We are, all human beings. Sometimes, we just judge straight away if somebody's like 2 minutes late or something happens. So I become more as you said, open and also considerate and thoughtful, and that is again open my mind to different views, different possibilities, and it's very beautiful.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And thank you for asking me a question.
My pleasure. Please feel free to jump in and share. I'm sure you have so many stories.
Will do. Thank you. Well, another thing is, we know, again, we talk about this a lot, and a lot of people are trying to commit to diversity and inclusion. And I'm particular about this word, try. And I'm really interested to learn from you, and I think the viewers would love to hear, what does 100% commitment actually look like?
Mm-hmm. I believe there's not one answer to that, but what I believe strongly is, if we only talk about diversity and inclusion, but we don't actually do anything within ourselves, if we don't live it, then it's not commitment. It's just, maybe a buzzword. It's maybe something trendy that we are following. We must live it, what we are saying, what we are committed to. If people see that you're living it, then I think it's commitment. And also, as I mentioned, that within your network, people must know about what you're advocating for. For example, women in leadership, or allyship for LGBTQ communities, or people with disabilities having more access to offices. So there are so many different elements, but having your owning that story, living it, and people see that you authentically live it, and I think that is commitment. It's not very difficult to have that commitment, but I think it's very difficult to keep it persistent, by the busy life that we live, and keeping that commitment persistent, that we authentically do our best, and we trust in ourselves that we can make a difference by inviting people to something valuable that we see, or as you said, if you read a book that you find useful, that would benefit your friends, your colleague as well, that you share that. And I think that culture, the commitment is very visible, and it only, if we live it, then it's commitment rather than just saying just for the sake of saying our commitments.
Absolutely. And yes, some of us are living it. Some of us would like to live it a little bit more, perhaps. And I'm a true believer in tiny steps and, atomic habits, marginal gains. So if someone's wondering what would be the first teeny tiny step that we could commit to today to champion diversity and inclusion, starting after this call, what would be your advice?
Mm-hmm. I'm going to give a few examples. Okay. And it's going to be, it has to be regular. So if you say you would like to commit to 10 minutes every week for learning about diversity and inclusion, living about it, in that minutes of time, book that time on your calendar. Maybe you're going out for a walk or something, doesn't really matter. Maybe you can listen to a podcast about diversity and inclusion. Or maybe you can read a book about it. Or maybe you can watch an online course, a webinar series, like, for example, the one that we are having. Or you can bring your friends to a diversity and inclusion event that is hosted publicly. Or within your network, you can, ask your friends, what is one thing that I can do or join your diversity and inclusion initiative that maybe they might be, organizing or organizer of a series of events, or just dedicate, maybe book a calendar time for 10 minutes, 15 minutes per week. Doesn't matter, depends on how much, but every week you just sit down and think, which one are you going to do? Are you going to listen to a podcast? Are you going to read a few pages from the book? But by time, it adds up. And as we change 1 degree in our, flight, by time we end up in a completely different destination. So hopefully we end up in more inclusive shores by time, eventually.
Great. No, absolutely. The 1%. Yes. So Furkan, you told us that what we need to do is own our story, that we need to share our culture, that we need to make sure that we are vulnerable as leaders, because that will create trust. And the last tip you gave us was to book some time in our calendar and make a true effort to read upon this topic, listen to podcasts, join webinars, or just join initiatives from our colleagues. So it's been a really wonderful thing to learn from you. And you mentioned earlier before the call that you wanted to ask me something about your book. So over to you then.
Yes, I have a question, and it's been wonderful talking to you, Maya. And you recently read my book, which is very exciting for me. So what is the one thing you really liked? Or is it the story, or is it, so what did you like about my book, actually, I'm wondering?
So it's definitely the chapter on self-awareness, because, and where you said that we need to, open our blind spots and make sure that we see things that, with the help of others, see things that we don't see. And the reason why this was my favorite part is because it's linked very much to coaching, which is something that I've been living and breathing over the past 2 years. I truly believe that all change begins within us, but change can only happen when we actually have the awareness. And so this is why I brought it up earlier in the interview as well, that I really love how you empower readers to start with ourselves. So that is 100% my favorite part of the book. And also a little bit about empathy, also because you mentioned self-empathy as well. Because when we talk empathy, we think like we need to have, or we have empathy for others, but empathy for ourselves is absolutely critical to succeed in anything in life, not just diversity and inclusion. It's really overarching.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing this. I think the thickest chapter in my book is actually in the self-awareness piece. And as you said, that's the starting point. And I think it's a very good highlight at the end of our conversation. Self-awareness. Let's find out more about ourselves. And I would like to actually And my talk by reminding the fantastic quote from Rumi, and it says, "Yesterday I was clever. I wanted to change the world. Today I'm wise, so I'm changing myself." Absolutely love this quote.
Yes, love that. It's a quote in your book, indeed. Great. So Furkan, where can members of Women Automotive Network find you and interact with you?
You can find me on LinkedIn and also my website, furkankarayel.com as well. It's available. There is a contact page there. And if you have, any questions, if you would like to invite me to speak about diverse and inclusion, especially action-oriented diverse and inclusion, or inclusive intelligence, how to be a role model for diverse and inclusion in the workplace, or women in leadership. So I'm all open to your invitations, and I look forward to meeting you all.
That's wonderful, wonderful. Well, Furkan, on behalf of Women Automotive Network, thank you. It has been an absolute honor to speak to you. Please keep inspiring change. And I would also like to thank all of our viewers for watching us today, wherever in the world you may be. Please look out for the next episode of Leadership Interview coming out in February here in the community. And until then, I wish you all a wonderful day, and bye-bye. Bye, Furkan. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Maya and the Women Automotive Network. Thank you, everyone. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.